Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We had the State of the Union last night, as I'm sure all of you are aware, as our regular schedule is. We were recording this just after noon on Wednesday, so the morning after. And I'm sort of curious how many listeners to the podcast watched the State of the Union, because I've actually seen a number of roundups, kind of articles reacting to the State of the Union where the person says they didn't watch it. The reason I say that is that I think partly because of Trump, partly because of what Trump has done to the State of the Union, and I think Kate actually said something like this in the last podcast. Like all of the trappings of it are gone, and that didn't necessarily start with Trump, and that gets to something that, as I think about it, is almost one of my biggest takeaways now. And that is that Trump really got bummed out over the course of 2 hours about the Democrats not standing or applauding or cheering for him. And I keyed into that. I mean, it took him about an hour to start getting upset, right? And then he got more upset as it went. And what was striking to me is that, I mean, dude, we've been doing this for a year. People are upset. You know the Democrats don't like you, right? You know that. You know that they were going to do, a lot of them were going to boycott. They're going to sit on their hands, all this kind of stuff. You know that. It's not a surprise. And you are leaning into the fight. So how is that getting to you? How is that getting to you? Because it did get to him. What one would expect he would do is sort of play with it. Oh, these guys over here, they're not uh you know, I don't know what you can say. They're afraid to have their supporters see them clapping for me, and you have fun with it. But he wasn't having fun with it. He was getting increasingly irked. And as I've thought about it through the morning, I really think that's because he's deep in a bubble. He's deep, deep, deep in a bubble of just that constant flattery, and he just doesn't see that stuff. And that was, in some ways, that gave me most of that gave me my strongest sense of his state of mind, beyond all the other things, which was that it was tired. You know, they feel like they're on autopilot. It felt, I think I wrote in a post today, it kind of had the feeling of like a nostalgia show, right? You go see some 60s band, 70s band, they're playing the same stuff, trying to kind of make it sound like it did originally. Kate, do you think, did I read that right, that he wasn't play acting, that he was actually getting irked that they were not cheering him, that they would not stand up?
Which is pretty funny because, there's always this kind of debate about how should the minority party protest. And, we're so far from the days of Joe Wilson being a huge deal and a huge kind of fundraising boon for him in
Right.
particular.
Right.
Um, it's like every president is going to get heckled now. That's how it is. And there was the paddle thing when all the Democrats brought the little auctioneer paddles, and that was pretty stupid. And there this year, I feel like it was a much lower kind of octane debate, but it was, should everyone boycott? Should all the Democrats just not go and be like, not really lend their presence as a sign of legitimacy? Or is it better to have disapproving reactions for the camera to pan to, blah, blah, blah. And I think it honestly could not matter less. I think the State of the Union doesn't really matter anymore. I mean, it rinses out of the news cycle in like 12 hours at the best of times. And with this one, it just seemed pretty clear to me going into it. Like, as soon as Trump started, quote unquote, previewing it by being like, oh, it's going to be really long, it's like, okay, his whole kind of driving aim is he wants to have the longest State of the Union in American history. Right. And like,
Each year, a new
yeah,
longest. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like the substance is irrelevant. It's all going to be about length. And to that end, the only thing I truly cared about at all in this State of the Union was like, I was interested if he was going to chastise the justices. And well, I was a little curious to see if he was going to start a war with Iran mid speech. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what I was looking for. And the Supreme Court stuff was shockingly mild, like just a couple lines about, oh, an unfortunate decision, blah, 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 but very, like, almost curiously restrained, I think.
Hmm.
And then the Iran stuff too was just kind of, uh, a little saber rattly, but nothing kind of beyond the pale or outside of other things he's been saying.
Right. 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 Yeah, the point about length is clearly he sees this as a test of stamina. Because I think I remember, it's funny because, Bill Clinton had, um, by far the longest State of the Unions to that point, and there was this pattern when he was president that pundits would routinely hate it. And then you get back these polls, and people are like, oh, we love Bill. It was amazing, and all this kind of stuff. And basically, what it was is that he, they, and I have this memory. I don't know if this is right, but like one of his was 45 minutes. And at the time, people were like, why don't you just read the fucking phone book, dude? That is outrageous. 45 minutes. But I think I don't even know at this point. I think that maybe maybe back in the old days, I'm talking about like, Kennedy or something like that. I don't know, 20 minutes or something like that. In any case, Clinton departed from the kind of, I'm going to give an inspiring speech. And he switched to, I'm going to say a few things and I'm just going to list off policy after policy after policy, and just nerd out and whatever. And generally speaking, uh the public liked that because his policies were ones that, certainly as presented, and I think in a lot of cases in actuality, were ones that help people. So kind of like, oh, he's thinking about us, blah 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 blah. But yeah, there was it's nothing new to say the Trump speech was disjointed, but it just had this, to me, this very strong sense of calling it in, not just from Trump but from the speechwriters. Kind of like, you know okay, we're unpopular and we're doing all of our things, and kind of we're going to stay unpopular and doing all of our things. So let's just kind of go through the motions here. Um, and yeah, it was that was my that was my big sense of it.
It's just kind of funny because I remember like the West Wing episode about when the president's going to give the State of the Union. And it is just reflective of a world we just don't live in anymore. Where like it's this behemoth project, right? Like the speechwriters have been working on it for, months, and there's all this last minute finagling. And it's like, how is the president feeling today? Like, is he kind of on his A game? Is he gonna turn in a performance? And there's like, the dials, people are watching the dials and they're like, oh my god, like they loved that. It's just kind of like it used to be just this endeavor, like a major thing that kind of the president and his staff did. And now it's just, aside from Trump being like a terrible public speaker, it's just, you also know, like he doesn't and his staff don't have the discipline to like work on something for weeks at a time, to really kind of wholeheartedly pour into what at its best is conceived as your vision, right? Your vision for the country in the one time you kind of have to convey that to the American people. And like maybe the State of the Union has never been that. And maybe that's just, a Sorkin-esque ideal. And it's always just kind of been a laundry list for political junkies and not been more than that. But we're just so eh, we're so far from even like gesturing in that direction. It's like Trump wanted to get up there, he wanted to talk for a long time, he wanted people to clap for him a lot, and he wanted to like take these various people and have them stride into the chamber dramatically and festoon them with medals and do his little game show thing of like, oh, we love him, don't we love him, beautiful, they came up to me crying, sir. It's just like he is just so fundamentally like the little kid at a family gathering who's like, everybody watch me, watch me, watch me, everybody gather around. And like
Hmm.
that's what this exercise was.
And what did he give? Did they give the presidential medal? What did they give to the goalie? I can't.
Yeah,
One of the
Presidential
one of,
Medal of Freedom.
right, which like, and look, I'm sure he's a great goalie, but that was sort of like what, like that's I,
Is this an appropriate place for me to do my hockey tangent?
yes,
Because it's
yes,
gonna
yes.
happen. Okay.
Okay, do it.
Um, First of all, the men's goalie let in the same amount of goals in the gold winning game that the female goalie let in for the entire Olympics. So just putting that out there. But I'm sure all of our listeners have seen this. Basically, the US men's team wins gold. Kash Patel comes into their locker room chugging Coronas with them. A video kind of comes out of that. And then another video comes out of the team on the phone with Trump. And he makes this little joke about, how he has to also invite the gold winning women's team or he'll be impeached. And all the players are guffawing along with that. And I've seen just a startling amount of kind of normal people being like apologists for the hockey players and being like, they're being polite. There's nothing weird about talking to the president after you win the gold medal game. Like, of course, they think highly of the women's team and all this stuff. And I'm just like, what the fuck are any of you talking about? Like, they're professional athletes, We're not in the era of like these are high school kids or whatever. Like, they are millionaires basically. They're professionals. They've spent the week kind of like taking photos with the women's team and like, you know, putting up this like kind of front of friendship, and then the moment they're behind closed doors and someone makes a really shitty joke about them, they're all like, totally, yeah, it sucks that we have to invite the bitches. Like, what a waste of time. And like, there is just nothing fundamentally lamer than being like, all right, boys, time to celebrate. Let's get the top cop in here. Like, where's the FBI director? It's just like, it's so pathetic on every level. And then the like cleanup attempts, are this guy, Jack Hughes, who's like missing half his teeth, whose mom coached the women's team that he just laughed at. And he's like, God, everyone's making things so negative. They're making it so political. Like, you know, completely unarticulate, but they know how we feel about them. It's, I'm an American, I'm patriotic, like whatever. And then they non-politically are flown in, the president's plane, and they non-politically get a private tour of the
He
White
flew them in on
House.
Air Force One. I hadn't
Yeah.
heard that yet.
And they non-politically attended the speech, and they non-politically put on like MAGA hats, or like at least his style of like USA hats. And
Right.
um it's and it blows my mind. People are being like, be mad at Trump, be mad at Kash Patel. It's like, well, everybody fucking knows that those people are huge misogynists, and like everybody knows that Kash Patel is like an enormous embarrassment as an FBI director. And like, the reason that the FBI director doesn't typically go to the Olympics is because they are too busy. Like, there's a reason why you're kind of the person who will go and do these diplomatic stuff are the diplomats, right? It's your Secretary of State or your vice president or someone who's like head of your country. It's not the FBI director. And we can get into how this has kind of spurred a whistleblower thing about the planes and everything. But I just want to say, like, for the record here, we know that those people are misogynist. And what is so upsetting about the hockey videos that I think maybe some men don't fully realize is like that is what you're scared of as a woman all the time. That men who are nice to your face and who like take photos with you and like nominally support you, the second you're out of the room are making fun of you and undermining you and being misogynistic. And so I don't know, this whole like soft bigotry of low expectations thing is just like really bumming me out. Like they're not just kids, they're professional athletes and I don't think it's too much. I'm not saying that, when Trump made the misogynistic joke they should have been like, "No, Mr. President," whatever, but it's like I don't think it's so much to ask to not laugh along, Is that
Yeah, no,
really
you
we're
can
asking the world there?
you can let it like, oh, okay, got it, Mr. President. You can definitely
Yeah.
signal.
And
You can
perhaps
definitely signal something.
maybe some side eyes at Kash Patel, maybe one or two of them being like, why the fuck is he in here with us rather than like festooning him with your medals and like pouring beer down his throat? I don't know.
That was part of that, like certainly. I mean, look, I'm sure a lot of those guys are Trump supporters. So at some level, like I get them being like, oh, we met with Trump, like, oh, awesome, like that doesn't surprise me. But I did it did sort of surprise me at some like, Cash, yo, buddy. Like what? Like who the fuck knows who Cash
So
Patel
pathetic.
even is? And it's funny that he when he was getting all of this, he went on Twitter and basically said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry for being so patriotic and hanging out with my I hanging out with my friends on the hockey team." And I was
The
thinking, like, dude,
boys.
yeah, dude,
He
like
used the phrase "the boys" like
the boy.
17 times. Yeah.
But with that kind of like, dude, they've never heard of you before. What the fuck you talking about? Right? I guess what is it? The coach let Cash in or
The
something like
general
that.
manager, I think. Yeah.
General manager. Um, that part was uh, I, it's funny. I think if I can't remember the guy's name, when Bill Clinton uh, became president, there was a was it Webster? No, it wasn't Webster. It was this other guy. Can't remember his name. In any case, there had been an investigation of him that predated Clinton, and he was being investigated, I think, for kind of like using stuff like using the FBI plane to like do personal business or something like that. Something that seems like very quaint at this point. And that report came out. It was pretty negative, and Clinton used that as the opportunity to fire him. Fired him for cause, and he kind of just wanted his own person. But that an investigation, misuse of public funds. That no one's gonna no one's gonna dispute that. It is Patel is. I mean, not only is he, in general, you're not allowed to, fly your girlfriend somewhere or I don't know, go to a party on the FBI plane. It doesn't matter if like, oh, because I was using the plane, they couldn't, what came out yesterday for listeners who haven't heard this yet is that Patel's use of one of the two FBI planes, which stick a pin in that's another issue. Use of two of the FBI planes delayed the FBI team getting to I don't think it was Salt Lake City, wherever that was in Utah, that Charlie Kirk was shot to death, and then again at Brown University with that mass shooting, that like the mass shooting team or whatever couldn't get there on time. This case, not because Cash wanted to show up there and be on the camera, but Cash was like down in Florida hanging out with his girlfriend or something like that. I mean, I had a certain question of like maybe they need another plane because like we need enough resilience and redundancy that we can handle the occasional podcaster director who's gonna be this wild. Like that was a little disconcerting. Like it's the FBI, get another plane. But that he can manage this, and you know, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
The thing that's like so pathetic about these people, Hegseth is another one of these. It's like you kind of bumbled your way into a job you were completely inappropriate for, right? Like you are less qualified than anyone who's ever had this job before. And you still get to be it. You still get to call yourself this really big fancy title that very serious people have held before you. And if I was in that position, if I had been made, FBI director kind of like on a whim, I would be in cover my ass mode all the time. I would be dressing the part, I would be talking the part, I would be like getting caught working all the time. I would be trying to kind of plant stories about how, like, God, does she sleep? She's on top of everything. It's amazing. But they
Well, you'd also want the stories that are like, did we underestimate Kate? Everybody
exactly,
thought Kate wasn't
exactly.
qualified, but wow,
Yeah.
we're all
I've never
surprised.
I've never seen a director so competent, said one seasoned agent off the record. It's just like it but these people are so kind of like arrogant, and they're so bought into this thing that the MAGA kind of cultural revolution is complete and successful, that they don't even have to kind of gesture towards like the trappings of the office. Like they are fully comfortable kind of treating the FBI directorship the same way they would as if, they had married into a billionaire family and suddenly had all the access of the uber wealthy. It's just perks. Like they're only interested in kind of the fun stuff that comes along with the job and don't even have the discipline to project an interest in the substantive parts of the job. So it's just it like you have these kind of like really high profile things happening right now that the FBI is supposed to be in charge of, and it leaves you kind of feeling like you're just yelling into a void, because there was a time where like a news anchor's mother gets kidnapped, and this is going to be a really salacious big story, and like the FBI is taking great pains to kind of appear on top of it and be doing briefings about it and sharing the progress and stuff. But he's not even pretending that there's kind of any plan other than like, well, if someone doesn't turn him in, that's kind of all we can do here. So I might as well stop by the Olympics, stop by a WWE match, kind of be a weekend warrior type about this job.
Yeah, it is very strange. I mean, as you, I mean, as you were talking, I was trying to think like, is Patel or Hegseth less qualified? And I was getting distracted with my as I was distracting myself trying to kind of think this one through, because it's actually a little hard to it's a little hard to say. I think that Kash Patel was like a junior DOJ line attorney, prosecutor, just like, briefly, and just, when you apply to be a lawyer at DOJ, he had one of those jobs briefly. Generally speaking, you have some very senior former DOJ person. Often it's a former judge. And with Hegseth, the fact that he served is, and more than like a 2-year stint, that is that's kind of his qualification, but that's pretty, a lot of people serve in the military, right? I mean, that it is it it's wild. What does kind of bring this together is, and I'm sure people have seen these stories too, is, Christy Nome at Department of Homeland Security. As I think we talked about last week, her boyfriend, I'll toss in an allegedly for kind of quaintness, co-runs the department for her. And there was a big story out this week that DHS is basically buying a kind of a tricked out pimp mobile jetliner that they can fly around on together. Um, people making all sorts of like, kind of jokes about it or whatever. But like they all have private jets, and they all there's nothing. I don't think we've talked about this on the pod before. They are all living on military bases, so they don't have to. Uh, Apparently, what happened with Christy Nome is someone staked out her apartment or her house in D.C. Took pictures of Corey like coming out with a duffel bag or maybe going in with a duffel bag. Since they lived together, um, they didn't want that to happen again. So she moved on to a Coast Guard, uh, you know, Coast Guard base in D.C. so that it's private. People can't get near her house. And she's not. I think like something like most of the top cabinet secretaries are living on military bases for precisely that reason. And I guess they're probably so they're getting free housing. It's the things that are going on. The things that are going on in this administration are, you know, as we know, stunning. But we know that.
I just like wish people would care, and I don't feel like they do. I think the whole kind of look what ends they're putting your taxpayer dollars to, it just, I don't know, doesn't feel to me like it's very compelling for people for whatever reason.
I guess that's true in a way, but I think we also need to look at he's super unpopular. And
Yeah.
and it's like it's hard. I think what it is that the elite press, it's not that the elite press doesn't care exactly, because what I just described was part of an investigation. All of these things are investigations or things that have come out. But I think what we see at the elite press level, and here I'm not even sure I should say elite press, but there is a framework, and it was hard to see the existence of this framework before you started, um, before you had the capture of the Department of Justice and the different sort of ethics watchdogs that monitor this stuff. That you have a process where, so Kate and I, as journalists, we go out, we find X, we find out that Kash Patel has been using the plane for private stuff. Okay, we get that story. Based on that story, an inspector general starts an investigation, or maybe even like the DOJ starts an investigation. And now it is a story at a new level because there's an investigation. Then you're following the investigation, and then there's this process to it. But and in a way, this was ingenious on their part, because it's not just that fire decapitating all the inspectors general offices and the public corruption part of DOJ. It's not just that like people aren't going to go to jail, or they're not going to be punished, but that whole framework, that trajectory, that set of steps that we know about for public wrongdoing, it just breaks apart. It just collapses. And so for reporters, sure, you write the first story, but then you wrote it, and kind of you're going to write it again, right? There's no traction for it. But I do think there is, at least arguably, a distinction between what this sort of elite news ecosystem does, and how and what the public thinks, because he's super unpopular. So I don't think we can say like, oh, nothing matters, because something's mattering for him. And when you look at when you look at the polls that like just why is he unpopular, you increasingly see things like corrupt, thief, or cruel, or they hate the ICE stuff. So these things do break through. They just there's a big part of it that there's almost like a sort of a journalistic prosecutorial complex, and that has been broken. So a whole part of it doesn't, a whole part of that equation doesn't exist anymore.
So, speaking of unpopular things related to Trump, let's talk about this newest Trump Epstein development, which was kind of percolating for a while. Roger Sollenberger, in particular, was kind of on this. I think he was at the Daily Beast before. Now he's just an
Yeah.
independent journalist. But he was the one who kind of recognized that there was a discrepancy between the ledger of documents about these FBI interviews with a woman who had accused Trump of sexual abuse when she was a minor, and the documents that were actually reflected in the database. Um, and then the NPR kind of piggybacked on that and found that there were about over 50 pages missing related to these, kind of notes from the FBI interviews, and that this woman's first interview with the FBI was in the database, and there were no mentions of Trump in that. She had also accused Epstein, but that everything related to the other three interviews nowhere to be found. And this woman who, this kind of stands out. We talked before how there are all of these unsubstantiated allegations in this tranche of files, and how it's really kind of dangerous to like go near them because there's so little context, and it's really unclear how much follow-up there was, if any. And then you also have to weigh it against the point that like there's a lot of people out there, some of whom are delusional, some of whom, when someone is president, you get all kinds of like nutso tips into the FBI, right? Like that is
Yep.
also that's in the ether. So all that being said, we know that there is a woman who said that in 1983, when she was around 13, Epstein basically gave her to Trump. Trump, had her start performing oral sex on him. This is her allegation, that she basically bit down and he punched her in the head and told her to leave. That is her allegation. And we know that the FBI took this seriously enough to conduct 4 interviews with her, right? Um, that is a really big deal, and we're not saying that, it's been proven true or that he has been convicted on this charge, but that shows that, the people who are really well trained in this did not hear that accusation and just say, yeah, okay, and he's a lizard person and they're aliens, like she did this as an adult and went through the kind of traumatic rigmarole of being interrogated by the FBI about her claim. And so when these reports came out, the DOJ basically said this is a nothing burger. Any documents that are missing it's either victim protection, it's executive privilege, or it's part of like ongoing court proceedings, nothing to see here type thing. And I have to say, momentum is gaining around this, right? And the last piece I forgot to mention, on the heels of the NPR thing, um, Garcia, who is the ranking Democrat on House Oversight, said, I saw the unredacted files. There are missing pages. We're doing a kind of a parallel investigation trying to figure out what's going on here. So that's all the kind of that's how the story's been advanced so far. And it's picking up steam, right? Like for a while when it was just Sollenberger, people weren't really paying attention. And then you had kind of the imprimatur of a legacy outlet attached. And now you have the House Democrats attached. And it's, kind of an accreting snowball at this point. But it does a little bit, I think, just kind of stop you in your tracks that Trump has been accused of sexual assault of a minor, and it's not like stopping the world from turning. It's not like wall to wall coverage of on every, you turn on CNN and that's the chyron. It's kind of just still like one of the headlines. I don't know. I am finding that a little astounding.
It is, and I I do think it got to a certain, if I'm remembering the timeline, I think that the House Democrats on oversight, they released it a few hours before the State of the Union or their kind of statement or whatever. So, and that, I mean, that was the Um, that was when and that he also saw the pages, right? So that's another level of thing. I mean, let me ask you. I thought that, and I mean, this what I'm about to say almost makes your point more. That I thought that in various of these documents there were, some more hearsay-ish accusations against him, and that what makes and kind of someone said, oh, and yeah, this with Trump, but but what distinguishes this is that you don't do multiple follow-up interviews if someone just says, oh, I heard this, or yeah, I did this, but they don't remember details or whatever. You do that when you're pursuing something. And that this woman eventually said she didn't want to, not that she didn't want to press charge, she didn't want to be involved, she didn't want to do any more. And for you to get to that point, that has to be in response to the FBI saying they want to not necessarily bring charges. It's not ever technically up to the FBI to bring charges. They recommend them, but they're taking it to the next step, and she says no. And this is, if I'm recalling the details of this, this is in 2019. So, like, you can understand why this woman says no. At that point, it's not just that Trump is president. That's at the point where we've seen multiple cases of well, lots of people accusing Trump of things, not just on the assault rape spectrum, but any number of things. And those people are become permanent public punching bags for Trump. They get death threats and stuff like this. So yeah, this I guess we're gonna have to see, but yeah, I mean, it's sort of, there's this aspect of the Epstein files that, it's not just a throwaway line, that you can't just assume basically unvetted accusations are true. Not only do you not know it, it's just fundamentally unfair to think in that way, even even about terrible people. Um, but when you look at them in totality, everything that is in there, you say, like, wow, a lot of women who are tied to Epstein accuse Trump of stuff, and seemingly more than a few underage girls accuse him of stuff. And we know the reality that 10 unsupported accusations don't equal two fully supported and proven ones. But at a certain point, you have to think, like, wow, Donald Trump's sure unlucky. A lot of people making up stories about him. At a certain point, you know, 20 unsupported accusations may add up to like one not so unsolid one. Or as I said, or he's just super unlucky for someone who had like nothing to do with Epstein.
Yeah, and I want to say, because there has been this kind of like centrist backlash thing to Epstein that the podcast If Books Could Kill, which I really love, just did kind of an episode on this, where the kind of like the Meghan McCardles, okay, like Rossed out, that kind of like these reactionary centrist people,
Mm-hmm.
did a podcast episode, I guess, kind of responding to the furor around the allegations, and they were like, I don't know, like Meghan McCardle said something like, you know, before Me Too, 16-year-olds were just around, and things would happen, and I'm sure for our listeners, this all goes without saying, but it's like, that is disgusting. It's disgusting. Like, I frankly think it's disgusting, even with women who are, just on the right side of the line of consent. Like, that line is not there for old adult men to sleep with teenagers. Like, it's for, it's just, it's so disgusting to me. Like, we're talking about kids. And when we're talking about a 13-year-old, that is really a kid. like they look like a little kid, you know? There are Girl Scouts are setting up in my neighborhood right now and selling cookies and stuff, and it's just, the older I get, the more I'm like, kids, kids. It's not normal to have teenagers around. Imagine like if you were in any social setting and there were 16-year-olds there, you'd be like, what the fuck? Like, what is going
Unless
on?
unless
Like,
it's
this
like a
is
family
weird.
Thanksgiving dinner, right? It
Yeah,
was
exactly. As soon as you take, like, cousins or nieces and nephews out of the picture, it's weird. It's weird. You should not be partying with teenagers when you are an adult. That's just bizarre in every context. I've made so many allowances for these old gross guys of being like, "Oh, well, he didn't rape them. Like, he just really had a fondness for hanging out with, like, high school freshmen." And it's like, weird, weird, should be grounds for being ostracized.
it's funny. I in some ways I almost feel bad for reactionary centrists associating Meghan McArdle with them because she is one, but she so consistently says moronic things and has since she entered public life like about 20 years ago. But there is this. I think that there was. I mean, Wall Street Journal editorial page, but I believe there was. What is it? Gerard Baker, who he's. I can't remember if he's like currently one of the editors at the Journal, or he's part of the sort of the Rupert sphere, right? These people who go from like Fleet Street tabloids to Murdoch's U.S. publications. But he had a column, I think it was yesterday, saying, this is guilt by association, this kind of thing. That basically there is a witch hunt um, going on with the Epstein files, and there's I guess there's some of that to the extent that people are in some cases getting in trouble for things that even if revealed they might not get in trouble for if it weren't proximate to the Epstein thing, like the guy out in LA who's I guess like the chairman of the LA Olympics, that basically he was like flirting with Ghislaine Maxwell, and he, I don't know, he had to sell his whatever. In any case, it's funny that this is a in some way this is a segue into what we're going to talk about in a moment, which is this guy Tony Gonzales, this representative Tony Gonzales, that you if you're tight with Epstein and his people, you know, you may get kind of muddied up 20 years from now when all of his dirty laundry comes out. And that's a good reason not to uh not to get too cozy with really sleazy people.
Yeah.
Even if you might not have done, or we don't know. I mean, I guess in those emails, sort of like, why were they so tight? Why was he and Ghislaine Maxwell so tight? Should we go ahead to Tony Gonzalez, because this is
Yeah.
uh,
I wanna
uh
just my last comment I was
yeah.
gonna say, in accordance with what you're saying about Epstein, is, like, it's not like Epstein had this, like, big, great stuff going on, and then this, like, unfortunate predilection on the side. It's like, this is what he was famous for. He was the most famous pedophile. That's what we knew about him.
Well, and
Everyone
even
knew that about him.
Well, even when, like, we didn't know it, that what has come out of a lot of these. I mean, back in, like, I didn't know this in the 90s. Never heard of Jeff Epstein in the 90s or even in the 80s. Maybe if I had been living in New York, maybe I would have. In any case, what is very striking, and in some way it's even what Trump got in. It's hard to say he got in trouble for it, but with that birthday card, was that in his world, people are like, Jeff loves the girls,
There
likes
was
them young,
nothing
wink,
else.
wink.
Yeah, there's not like, "Oh, he's an avid cyclist, he's a birder." That's his thing. That is his big thing.
And well, even
God.
it's funny that even the things beside that, though, are like, 'cause what Andrew whatever Andrew did with the woman who wrote the book, whose name
Virginia
Joyfrey,
Giuffre.
yeah, Giuffre. I've never known how to pronounce her last name. Um, what he and I forget Mandelson's first name. They call him Lord Mandelson now. What they both got in trouble for is they were alleged to have basically shared classified information, British classified information, with Epstein. And at first, when I heard that, I was like, "What are like kind of what was he doing if he's getting like kind of like national security?" So I think what it is it was like market moving stuff, right? So it
Mm.
wasn't. I mean, maybe it was also maybe he's got connections where it would be helpful for him to know like kind of hard national security stuff. But in any case, to your point, even the stuff that isn't about abusing girls is like getting members of the royal family to share like classified information so you can make strong market moves.
Totally.
It's or kind of having your little kind of soft white supremacy salons
Oh, yeah, his, like,
like
eugenics
Harvard.
passion. Right,
Well,
exactly.
it's funny. I tweeted something about this, but that that and for all the evolutionary psychologists among our listeners, I know there are people doing good work in your field, but it does seem like about 60% of the people in the field of evolutionary psychology were tight with Jeff Epstein. And like it really does. Like all they keep, whenever they're talking about like, oh, this professor, this famous professor, that famous professor, like overwhelmingly, that's where they uh, that's where they come out of. So there's a lot, and just the I don't know the stuff that I don't know the scholarship. It is a it is a fascinating story. If for nothing else, it brings so many things in, so many
Mhm.
people in, so many. I'm not sure how much impact Epstein and his money had on actual scholarship, but he clearly had a very big impact on the synapse between scholarship and popular culture. And that was clearly a big part of Epstein's system, his cultural clout, that he was sort of presenting himself as, sort of like a, man of letters, man of science, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so let's end the show, just this a really kind of dark story, about this guy, Tony Gonzales. He is in the House. He represents a fairly Republican district. Cook had it as an R+7. And what's happened is earlier this month, we started kind of getting some buzz around the fact, well, the seeming fact that he had an affair with a woman who worked for him. And, what kind of takes this from the realm of, fairly ordinary evils to the more extreme is that she died by suicide after he kind of cut off the affair, and her husband seemed to find out about it right at the same time, and she just spiraled. And it's horrible. She and her husband have a son together. It's a really, really tragic. And so we had those um some evidence of this trickling out earlier this month, and that now the story is kind of taken up another notch because we got another big kind of deluge of information where, I think the San Antonio Express got some purported text messages that he had sent her where he's trying to get her to send him pictures and have like inappropriate sexual conversations with her, all the time that this we're getting kind of more nuggets and nuggets of nuggets that this happened, and that she had told people about it at the time. There are some texts to that effect as well. He's saying didn't happen, this is disrespectful to her memory, blah, blah, blah. But we're now at a point where the tragedy of it all is kind of increasing the pressure on him, and now you're getting, to their credit, Boebert and Mace, Thomas Massey,
Luna.
uh, Luna, and
Yeah.
Brendan Gill, I think, is everyone so far. But you're getting a kind of a growing chorus of Republican House members who are saying you've got to drop out. Um, Gonzales is up
Just
for reelection
resign.
right
Yeah.
now. Yep, resign, drop out of your reelection race. Early voting has already begun. He is being challenged in the primary, including by this, sounds like a prince of a guy, this kind of YouTube influencer known as the AK guy, because he like really loves guns. And he had run against Gonzales in 2024, and Gonzales only won by like a few hundred votes, so he was already in a pretty competitive primary atmosphere. And now all of this has kind of come out just on the eve of people voting. And it's now reached a point where like everywhere Mike Johnson goes in the Capitol, he's getting asked about it. And he's kind of, hyper aware of his perilously thin majority, and is like, oh, he should address his constituents, but not, I think he should keep the seat, right? He's like trying to balance this line. And now we're at a point where Gonzales is having like meetings with Johnson, and those are being staked out. And I mean, everyone, it feels like, is kind of impenetrable in the Trump administration, but you're starting to feel like I I don't know how survivable this one is going to be for him politically.
It's definitely uh, as you said earlier on, uh, unfortunately, a member of Congress having an affair with staffer is that is not an uncommon story, and I'm sure it's a much more common story than than the ones than the examples we know about. Um, we don't have a lot of stories where the relationship goes bad and the woman dies. The woman kills herself, and I believe she self-immolated. She lit herself on fire, and uh, you know, uh, uh, I'm not sure that makes it worse exactly. The key thing is that she took her life, but that does, I don't know, add a kind of a just a different level of horror to it. Um, but yeah, it's hard for me to, it kind of goes back to what I said about that, that one guy in LA who has gotten in some trouble for flirting with Ghislaine Maxwell, because I have seen a number of people saying like it's not his fault that she took her own life, and I'm sort of like, well, I don't know, like this is sort of, it's they have they have in insurance, they have certain concepts of strict liability. If X happens, it's your fault because it's in the nature of X happening. I think if you are a member of Congress and you have an affair with a subordinate, and as a consequence of that affair, you cut her off, her marriage collapses, and then she kills herself, I think you take the hit for that because uh, that is kind of downstream of having an affair, and you probably shouldn't be having a lot of affairs with your subordinates as a member of Congress. So I don't think this was sort of like I have seen I have seen a number of people present this sort of like he's just having an affair, and then she kills herself, and he's on the line for it. Well, not exactly. There's a reason why these things are frowned upon. But like I said, I can't. It's too it's too awful to look at. I think for most people, you just can't. And his saying like, "Oh, it's not true," when you have the texts and like I have no doubt that, what is it, the Star Telegram or whoever got these, you get screen captures of text like that. As an editor, you're feeling really nervous. Am I getting set up here? So they ran it to ground. So his saying it's not true is too absurd. Maybe Trump can get away with that, but he can't get away with that. And again, I think it's the tableau is too horrifying for him to survive. Is my sense. Again, Trump can maybe do that. Not anyone else. No one else has the evil magic.
And I guess, like, if we're not going to hold people to account for being shitty anymore, like if we've just kind of lost that expectation of our public servants, we should at least be able to hold them account for being stupid. My God, like how, this really connects to Epstein stuff, but how these men love to leave a paper trail, eh, delineating their exact misdeeds. Like, pick up a phone. Have you ever watched The Wire? Like, there's there's a reason that like these kind of thugs of old, or like the Sopranos, right? They're like, don't call me at home, like, or talking on a payphone, whatever. If nothing else, the sleazebags have gotten awful loosey goosey with covering their tracks. So, that alone should see a head roll for not only, abusing your power dynamic with your subordinate staffer, but then laying it all out for the world to see in text messages. Like, well, yeah, no, I think that's enough to take the fall, even if you choose to discount kind of the psychic damage he inflicted on this woman.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's well, the thing with because what was interesting to me is that a significant number of these significant number a significant amount of the stuff that is in the Epstein files is from a period not when morality was different or shouldn't have been different, but when people were new at email, right? 20 years ago. They didn't have quite the sense of the permanence of it, I think. So I think that accounts for some of it. But the thing that strikes me in that is you had a lot of people, not least of which Elon Musk, up to dude, I never went to the island ever. I never went there. I never did this. I never did that. And there's and then you have this law that says it is now federal law that we have to release all things ever tied to Epstein, all his emails, all everything. And most of these guys were still sticking with their stories. And then it comes out and they're like, oh, like what? Like, and like with Elon Musk, you've got emails there where he's like, "Hey, can I come to the island, man? I hear that you're going to have a total blowout party tomorrow night." And even Epstein's like, kind of oversubscribed, you know.
The only thing more pathetic than going to the island is like begging to get invited to the island. It's
For the
just
big
like so
party, for the big
unbelievable.
party. I'm sure it was. I'm sure we know what kind of party it was. But yeah, that people it genuinely surprised me that a lot of these people, and especially people like, I don't know, Larry Summers or Bill Gates, people who we kind of knew were kind of in the Epstein danger zone, for lack of a better word, that you would think that like a few weeks before these things were released, you'd come out and say, "Hey, look, I did X, Y, and Z. I'm, you know, if for nothing else, not to to get some meager amount of credit for kind of outing yourself as opposed to just having people find out what was going on by being the first one to use a search function on
Yeah.
the DOJ Epstein portal." But in any case, that is where we are, and I think that's all we have for this week's episode. Anything else?
Yep. Nope. See you
All
next
right.
week.
Talk to you next week.